Hey there, it's Luis Miranda for LC Design. Today we're going to look at how to make this spline topology inspired by this Nike commercial. We're going to be using Xparticles and rendering inside of Redshift. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at the reference material. This was something that they sent to me while I was at a studio, and they asked me to try to recreate it as closely as possible. Right here, as you can tell, there's a nice little kind of like waviness to it, but the lines are all very spaced out like evenly. And also you have like these little glowing lines that are going through it. So with Xparticles, we can pretty much execute this entire scene from the shading to everything. So let's go ahead and play it down a little bit. So it's supposed to be like the muscles, and then we're kind of going up. But see how it's kind of like distorted, and it's also kind of, let's go back a little bit. So see how it's not just a plane, it kind of goes up and it's wavy. And so there's a lot of complexity to it. So let's go ahead and hop on into Cinema. Alright, so first things first, we're going to need to create ourselves an Xparticle system. So when looking at this reference, my first thought was maybe it's a follow surface, and I can quickly demo what the follow surface does. So let's go ahead and create a sphere. And you don't really need to follow along with this part, I'm just kind of illustrating something. Follow surface. And let's adjust our emitter to be a little bit more flat. And let's go ahead and our follow surface, drop it into here. And also let's increase this distance so that more things kind of go into it. So then you'll see that they kind of go in and then they follow the surface. And it's a little easier to see if I create a trail. And drop in the emitter. Okay, so now see how it kind of follows it. And so you can distort the sphere and then kind of give it some kind of like a topology look, but right away, even without any sort of displacement, you see that the splines kind of go in different directions. And what we need is for them to be parallel to each other at all times. And you can't really do that through simulating. You kind of have to do a very simple. It's very simple, but it basically, you just need them to be shooting straight and then affecting them. So let me show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and get rid of the follow surface and sphere. Let's go ahead and just keep our system. I have a folder structure already created, so I'm going to go ahead and drop this down into my XP systems. And first things first, we need to change our emitter, because right now, see how they kind of shoot randomly? Yeah, we need to make it a lot more uniform and space them evenly. And also, just in case I kind of glossed over this part, in order to make your trails appear on your emitter, you have to click on your trail and then drop the emitter inside of this emitter tab. Sometimes when you have your emitter selected and then you create an XP trail, it'll just automatically assign it. But since, just in case. All right, let's go ahead and keep going. I'm going to deactivate my trail just for right now while we set this guy up. All right, so first things first, let's go to our object tab inside of the XP emitter. Instead of rectangle, let's go ahead and go down to defined emission. And right away, it creates these boxes. And so if you press play, actually, let me activate my trail again. Right off the bat, you see that they're evenly spaced, and there's just 5 of them. But what's great about this is that you can actually just add a bunch of points. So instead of 5, we can do 50. And right away, you can see that it creates this big array of emitters. And so now they're all perfectly spaced. They're a little far apart, so let's go ahead and bring them a lot closer together. Right now they're set to 50 centimeters. I'm going to need something more like 0.5. So now it squishes them in real good. And so now when you shoot it, they're very close together, and they create this nice little uniform little pattern. This icon is kind of bothering me, so the way to deactivate that is to click on the XP systems, and then here in icon and viewport, just uncheck that, and you're good to go. Okay, so now we kind of have the basis of our topology, and so when we look at our guy, you see that they're all very evenly spaced. But now we need to kind of add the distortion to it. How do we get it to, you know, go up and down and all that good stuff? It's a very simple solution. Let's go ahead and just let this play for like a couple of frames. And so now we're going to go ahead and create ourselves a displacer. So right here in your displacer, go ahead and drop this onto the trail. And then let's go here into shading and then drop in a noise. And right away you see something happening. But when you get close, you see that it's actually moving left and right. And it has something to do with like the vertices of like the splines kind of having a different normal. So the simplest way to fix that is to just go here to Object, and here in Vertex Normal, go down to Planar, and then instead of plus X, you go to plus Y. And so now we're starting to get there. We have the vertical displacement, and what's really cool about this is that when you go inside your noise settings and you play around with the global scale, you can actually adjust it in real time. So that's like the best part about this, is that you can art direct this. And that's probably the most important thing about doing any sort of particles simulations, is being able to art direct it to very specific nodes. Yeah, like this right here, if they wanted to get it as close as possible, you're going to need to be able to create like these weird wobbly bits, be able to have it kind of swoop around and create like a lot of distortion to it. And you can't really spend your time just simulating different turbulence, settings. You kind of want to be able to see it and basically just tell it exactly what you want it to do. And this is the best way to do it. So right away you can kind of see that there's like faceting going on the trails, and that's because our trails are set to linear here in Spline. So it's Object, Spline. So here in linear, go to Bezier. You don't see anything happen because there's no intermediate points, but if you go down to subdivided, you kind of see it start to get a little bit cleaner. So here in angle, you can actually drop this down to 0. And then here in maximum length, you can actually drop this down to like 0.5, and it will actually smooth that out really nicely. If you get really close, you can still see some faceting, but we're probably going to be looking at it from like this sort of angle, and it looks pretty clean. And of course, you can always drop it down even lower if you need to. All right, so we kind of have the basis for the effect down. What we want to do is be able to also isolate individual strands so that some of them can glow and then the other ones can just be textured normally. So the way to do that is through the group system inside of Xparticles. So you have this tab right here for groups, and so basically we just need to create 2 groups. All right, so that's group 1. Let's go ahead and just create another one. So our first group is going to be called surface. This is just going to be the one that has, the color information, like all kind of like this sort of like metallic, and it kind of looks like it has a ramp, like a noisy ramp on it. And our second group is going to be glow. These ones are going to be the ones that are glowing. And it's really important that you notice that there's different colors, because there's a really cool technique for achieving that. So let's go ahead and restart our emission. Let's go ahead and change out the colors on our different groups. I want my glow to be blue, surface can be green. However, I do like to change the display type. Instead of dots, making these boxes and something else. I like using arrows. This way, when we emit them, they'll look differently, and we can actually count how many belong to each group. But right now, if I were to press play, you'll see that there's still the little green dots, which are kind of hard to see. However, And that's because we still haven't assigned these groups to the emitter. And so Xparticles is kind of funny like that. Once you create something, you kind of have to like assign things a lot. So you have to go here into your emitter and then go here to groups. And then here you tell it which groups to use. So we're going to go to surface and glow. Okay. So now it's set to random. So now there should just be kind of like a variation of, you know, green and blue, as you can see here. There's some that are green, some that are blue. But I want to have a little bit more control over this. I don't want it just to be random. I want to be able to tell it exactly like what percentage of particles should belong to which group. And the best way to do that is through here in this mode. There's this thing called gradient. There's a couple other ones. You know, sequential basically just means that it'll just go down the list sequentially, and so here it alternates one over the other. We don't necessarily need that, and also first group is, you know, pretty self-explanatory. It just puts it in the first group. So let's go ahead and choose gradient. And it took me a little bit to figure this guy out. It's not the most intuitive. So essentially what you want to do is create two notches. And so I initially, when I created notches, I kind of split them up like this. And I thought maybe this is how you kind of like, one side gets the other. I don't know what I was trying to figure out, but essentially once you fire it, you notice that all of them are in the second group. And that's because you have to look at this gradient as sort of like a 0 to 100. So over here left is 100, it's 0, and over here is 100. But the notches also correspond to the groups. So it reads it left to right, but it also, so whatever it hits first, that's going to be the first group, and then whatever hits second is going to be the second group. So the second group will always have more particles than the first group because of how it sort of works. Yeah, because it's always like, it just reads it left to right. It's kind of weird, but essentially when you have this notch over here, that means that glow is going to get 100% of them. And since this guy's all the way to the left, it's getting 0. But if you bring this up just a tiny bit, something like 25 or so, you'll see that 25 of the particles are going to go to surface, and then the remainder of the 100% will go to glow. So let's go ahead and check this out. And as you can see, there's a couple of greens mixed in, but there's a lot more blue. So it's kind of hard to kind of wrap your head around it a little bit, but once you kind of start playing with it and you can see like your you affecting it and then it kind of playing back how you expect it, that's pretty much all you really need. So yeah, once you kind of figure that out, it'll feel a little bit more intuitive. It kind of just requires you to play around with it a little bit more. Okay, so I want there to be about like 10% of these to be in the glow group. So here you can kind of see that there's, you know, a few of them in there, and which is nice. But I really want most of them to be the surface group. However, as you can see that a lot more of them are in the glow group. So what I want to do is just switch over the order so that surface is on the bottom. And that means that this second notch will affect the surface, and the first notch will affect glow. So that means that now surface is going to have way more, and glow will kind of be sprinkled in randomly. Cool. Okay, so we kind of have our system to split it. Now we need to be able to trail each one individually. So basically we just need to create another trail. The thing you want to do is, instead of creating a bunch of different trails for each individual color, there's actually a little technique inside of Redshift that lets you give it different color variation. And by that I mean, let me just show you, I guess. So let's go ahead and duplicate this trail. Let's drop it in, and let's get rid of that displacer that copied. And in fact, let's actually remove the displacer from that first trail and just put it inside generators. Okay, so now this trail 1, I'm just going to call it trail glow. In our original trail, I'm going to call it trail surface. Okay, so it's not going to do anything just yet. It's actually kind of creating two, actually, is it? Yeah, it's actually creating two duplicates. And that's not something we want. We kind of want each group to be trailed individually. So we need to go back into our groups, and for surface, we just drop in our surface group. And for our glow trail, we drop in our glow group. And so now let's rewind and press play. And right away you can see that the glow group is separated from the rest, and the surface has its own. And so now with Redshift, they have a Redshift object which lets you render these as hairs or cylinders, boxes. So let's go ahead and do that. So here, let's go ahead and I'm going to pull up the commander, Shift C. Let's go ahead and do Redshift. Oops. Object. So on surface, let's go ahead and click on our curve, and let's go ahead down to cylinders. And this is all done inside of the render preview. Let's go ahead and pull that guy in and press play. So just give it a sec. Okay, and right away you can see that it is creating a kind of like a sweep inside the render engine, but not inside the viewport. And this is pretty cool because you can just save all of this for render time and not have to worry about having a ton of geometry inside of your viewport. So let's go ahead and make some adjustments to this. It's a little too big. Like, these guys are way too thick. They're too close to each other. Looking at the reference, it's pretty small. So let's go ahead and drop this down from 1 down to like 0.25. And right away you can see the effect take place. I would say probably even less, like 0.15. And we might actually have to bring in these boxes, the emitters, a lot closer. But we can worry about that later once we have the system rocking and rolling. Okay, so here, now that you have that going, you can create a Redshift material, drop it onto your surface, and let's go ahead and just, inside our preset, let's go ahead and just choose like a platinum or something. And you can kind of see it reflecting, but since there's no light or anything, it's not really reflecting anything. So let's go ahead and create a dome light. And I use HDRI link. You don't necessarily need it, but I have it, and I'm just kind of showing you guys how to I'm just trying to visualize it as quickly as possible. So yeah, right away you can see that it picks up all the properties of the platinum material, and it's creating cylinders. So now, using this similar technique, we're going to do that to our glow. Let me go ahead and pause this because sometimes things crash. I'm actually going to save this real fast. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and copy over our Redshift object tab, or object tag, onto our glow trail. Cool. So let's go ahead and start this guy. And so now you can see that these guys are individual, are just separated from the rest of the group. And so let's go ahead and create ourselves another Redshift material. Let's drop that onto the glow. And so now I'm just going to go down. I'm going to open up the shader graph. Open this guy up. And here in overall, let's go ahead and just put in a color. So like a blue. And nothing happens, so you increase the emission weight. And so here's where we kind of get into the issue of giving these individual colors. You can try to do like a ramp and kind of spread it across, but there's a really simple way of doing this. If you go here into your Redshift tab, instead of a cylinder, change it over to a hair strand. Nothing will happen right away, but if you open up your material inside here in your nodes, if you type in random, it'll give you this hair random color. And so then you can drop this guy in and then here in overall, go to emission color. So right away you'll see that it's red. It's not really giving you random colors. But if you increase this hue amount, actually let's also increase the brightness of this color, or the saturation I should say. You see that there's all these more colors are being introduced. And so you can actually crank it up even more, and it gives you the full rainbow, or the full spectrum, I guess, of color. And so that's a really fun way to add just a lot of different colors without really much work on your part. And you literally just increase a slider and you're good to go. And if you want to kind of like maybe isolate it, you go, I want it to be more like in the blue. You can do that, and then it'll give you a variation of the blue first, and then as you increase it, it'll start reaching out more on both sides and giving you more of that spectrum. So yeah, I kind of like it right here. You know, we're just visualizing at this point, but at this point we pretty much have the system ready to go with the noise and with the trails being separated. So now we kind of want to be able to do even more. So as you can see, there's a lot of like turbulence to this guy. Like this part right here is very sort of like distorted. It kind of goes in and out. So let's try to push this even further. Let's close this guy down. Okay, so how do we do that? Inside our displacer, oh, and the reason I put the displacer inside the generator is because when you put something inside a null, it'll affect all the objects inside of it. And so these two guys are being affected by this displacer. And so if I were to remove the glow, or trail glow, you see that it no longer gets affected. Which could be cool because you can also give it a different displacer if you put it in its own sort of null groups. But since I kind of want them to be the same, we're going to just keep them in there together. Okay, so while we have this ability to, you know, drop in any noise we want, and when we play it back, it immediately generates that topology, you can actually take this a lot further. So instead of just putting a normal noise, you can actually go in here and use a layer. And so now you can actually layer multiple noises. And using the different transfer modes, you can actually start seeing a different variety of them. So if you hold your mouse over the transfer mode and then just with the spin wheel start like just spinning it, you start noticing how the different transfer modes work. And you can get like really interesting effects by combining multiple noises. And you can pretty much put as many as you want. Like this is kind of an interesting look. It's not the look that I'm going for, but it's really, you know, it has an interesting look, and you can just kind of generate anything really just by simply you know, just testing out each one. So let's start from the beginning. And yeah, I'm gonna need something like this. And what's also really cool is that you can click on these guys and play around with the scale. So you can kind of bring in like really big sort of shapes to kind of distort it and kind of give it more sort of like a rolling hills look, but then also have those like micro details in there. And you can even animate it. So let's go ahead and just put a 1 in there. And so now it's like moving as your trails are going. And so it's pretty cool. It's a really strong it's a really powerful technique. And I would definitely recommend just adding a lot of different layers, maybe even throwing in some images. Also, you can do an effect. You know, you can color correct them. But on top of that, you know, each noise also has its own, you know, like color values that you can do. So here in the brightness, you can actually increase it and bring it up, or you can like drop it, or you know, just playing around with this, like especially since it's all in real time, you can just dial in the exact look that you want. And that's like the most powerful thing about any particular technique, is just being able to dial it in to your exact specifications, or to more realistically to the specifications of your art director. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep playing with this. So now that we have this going, you're probably thinking to yourself, how do I get these particles to move with the topology? Because they're kind of all in a straight line, and if we preview these in our Redshift preview, you can see that they are all just basically in a single line, similar to when they got emitted, but the trails are being moved. So how do we move the particles with the trails? And also, in case you didn't catch that, I added a Redshift tab or a Redshift tag to the emitter, and then here in particles, I switched these to optimize spheres, and it kind of gives you this look. And I dropped it down to 0.25 because they were way too big. So how do we adjust this? Well, there's a very simple solution to this, thankfully. So one of the really cool things about Xparticles, is that you can actually use deformers. So pretty much this entire list of deformers you can use to affect the particles themselves, not just only the trails. So we already have a displacer, so we can go ahead and grab this guy, go here to our modifiers tab, and so it gives you the option to exclude modifiers, which are like the XP turbulence and all that, but you can also include deformers. And so if you were to just grab this displacer and drop it in there, right away you see that the particles move along the topology, which is really cool. However, there is an issue with this. So let's go ahead and just check this out. You can't really see it right here because of the crazy boxes, but right here is a good example of it. See how my trails are down here, but my particles are up here? There's kind of a discrepancy. It's sort of like, it's almost like an animation priority. One of them is like a frame ahead or behind. And that's because it's kind of, you're receiving double sort of modification. Let me see if there's a smarter way of explaining this. So because the trails are already being affected, but they're also tracing the particles, it's sort of like it's being doubly affected. So the particle is moving and creating a trail, and then the displacer on top of it is displacing even more. So we kind of have to keep these trails from being affected. So if you remove your displacer and put it into a different null, I have a null here called fields. So I'm just going to drop it in there. And so now the displacer is only affecting the particles, but not the trail. So now when you press play, you see that the particles and the trails are actually connected. And that's because the trails are just tracing the particles in their new path. However, this comes at a cost. If you go into your thing and you start playing around, so let's play around with the global scale, it's only affecting the particles, it's not affecting the trails. And so there's kind of a compromise here, where which one do you want to do? Like, do you want to have the particles as part of your topology, or do you just want the trails to be affected, but not, so it's kind of, you have to decide which one you want. However, there is a way to do both, to get both. And it's kind of funny. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is put your displacer back with your trail, and all you have to do is just kill this guy, and then all you have to do is duplicate your emitter, and then you can just kill this your tag on one of them, and on this guy you can actually put your deformer. And so this one is not being traced. You can kind of hide this guy. This one's not being traced, but it is still being affected. And so now, if you wanted to have the ability to art direct it and adjust the noise, it's affecting both, but separately. Like, one's not tracing the other. The trails are still tracing the ones that are going perfectly straight, whereas the other the other particles are being adjusted, and you can render those, and they match perfectly with the noise. So that's kind of like a nice little hack. The only problem with that is that you have to have two emitters, and if you make changes to one, you have to go ahead and make changes to the other. So it might make sense to just wait until the end to get this effect. So I'm just going ahead and kill it, and we're good to go. Okay. So that was a lot of layering stuff that it's not super fun, but knowing these things kind of lets you leverage a lot of the abilities of Cinema with the really cool stuff of Xparticles. They're a lot more integrated than you might think. Like I honestly didn't know a lot of this stuff until I experimented and like tried throwing fields and like deformers and had them work with like modifiers. Okay, so now that we have all of our techniques basically dialed in, we can now start to expand this and try to get that look from this, from our reference material. So we kind of still need to give it a little bit more deforming, so that it kind of goes upwards and kind of maybe bends a little bit. And here's kind of where you just need to experiment with these different deformers. So we definitely want to drop in a bend. So let's kind of just affect one. Let's kill this glow for right now, because this way I can then just parent the bend. It's a little easier. And yeah, it's also important to make sure that your bend is after the splicer. Although you can also kind of play around with it. So we'll actually play around with the order of operations so you can see what's going on. And also, let's go ahead and change this to unlimited. Ooh, snap. Huh. Actually, let's go ahead and limit it. Yeah, let's just keep it at limited. I've never actually seen that happen before. Okay, so see how it's kind of just bending it to the right? I want to be able to bend it kind of like a slope. So the best way to do that is to kind of just rotate it. So that's kind of doing it that way. I don't like that. Let's do it this way. And that's going to rotate it to the right. And that's almost there. Let's go ahead and rotate it one more time, 90 degrees. And yeah, we're kind of there. Okay, so yeah, just make sure you hit fit to parent. Just make sure that it's getting all that stuff. And so now you can actually start playing around with this. So you have yourself like this really nice kind of warping topology that you can either trace this way or you can go inside of it. And remember, you don't have to just do one. You can actually combine multiple bends. So if you create another bend, actually, sorry, I have all these bends over here. Let's go ahead and just create another one over here. And so now you have like this nice S shape to it. And so yeah, you can actually just keep layering these bends and even like, what is it, this twist. Actually, no, if you do another bend actually, but then rotate it, you can kind of get like very interesting effects. Let's see which one I would rather do. So you can kind of stretch it. What I'm trying to do actually is rotate it this way and then this way. And here you kind of have like that really weird sort of twisty look that they kind of have like here. And yeah, basically just maybe make it smaller, or play around with it. And here's maybe a good time to like maybe play around with your order of operations. So right here, it's displacing it first, so it's kind of creating that topology. Then it's bending it, and kind of just bending it this way. But then you add another one, which is kind of bending it like the opposite. It's kind of just adding a double bend. So let's see what happens if you put your displacer after the bend, maybe the second bend. It can give you interesting results. Personally, I think just having the displacer up top is giving you the most true effect from here. Yeah. So, okay. So let's go ahead and just say that this is how we want it. We kind of have ourselves, a nice little noise, and it's kind of moving in and out. And we can still play around with this displacer a little bit more. I think what I'm going to need to do is play around with the second noise, or the bottom noise, and kind of give it a little bit more detail so that it kind of moves around just a little bit more. And one thing we're definitely going to need to do is add a lot more points to these guys. So here in our subdivision, we're going to need to do maybe 0.1. That way we can have, because sometimes when you displace it a lot, it adjusts, like the resolution kind of gets really weird. So go ahead and just do this to both of them. 0.1. And so now let's go ahead and remove this guy and just kind of put it in the group, but not necessarily on each one individually, and activate both. So now when you go back and you press play, it kind of reveals it. And if you let it play, it kind of does its thing. What we want to do here in our emitter, since it's only this much, we can actually probably throw in even more. So I'm going to go ahead and save this before I do that because it's crashed in the past. Let's do 200. So now we have all these different, and so now we're going to play them. And so now it creates a lot more topology. And so here you can actually play it out a little bit longer. Yeah, it's kind of like really, it's kind of like the effect kind of ends. So let's go ahead and select all these guys and just select to unlimited. And it kind of creates like a cool figure 8. That's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and maybe adjust a little bit of these because it's a little much. And also our first bend. Yeah, there we go. Let's keep playing with this, see what happens. No, I don't like how that looks at all. What about our second bend? Ooh, that is weird. Oh, that kind of gives it a nice like look. I think we can probably modify this a little bit. There we go. That way it kind of gives it like a nice sort of sloping look to it. And if you trace your camera along this, kind of a nice little action scene. So let's go ahead and just find a nice little composition for this. I don't like how this emitter is kind of just getting in the way, so I'm going to go ahead and hide it. Cool. And also I'm going to hide the displacer, the bend, and everything else. And let's go ahead and start actually finding a nice composition and some nice lighting for this. Alright. And here I think it's really important to go ahead and add some bokeh effects. That way you can kind of, this effect looks a lot better when you have depth of field. As you can see here, you know, all this stuff in the background's blurred out really nicely. And also I'm noticing that my colors are kind of washed out, so I'm going to go ahead and add much more hue in there. Yeah, so now they're like a lot nicer. Also in my material, let's go to actually into overall. Let's go ahead and crank this guy up to 2, so they're a lot brighter. Cool. So now in our camera, let's go ahead and find a nice like focus distance. If there's one thing I like Redshift over, if there's one thing I like Octane over Redshift, is that in Octane I can just click in the inside of the viewfinder and in the view preview, and then it'll just focus, and it's really convenient. But you know, whatever, we're using a different engine, and it's fine. I'm not gonna complain about it. Okay, let's go ahead and click here. I think that gives you a nice like variation and gives you like a nice little area to look at. So here in our view, let's go ahead and darken up the edges so we can work a little bit better, because if you have the whole thing, you don't know what's actually being cut off. All right, and so I also like to play around with these composition settings. So I like to put my grid, and also like to do my little golden spiral. So let's see, what's a nice way to adjust this? camera. See, maybe we can focus right here. And these noises are a little extreme. I'm gonna kind of tone this down just a tiny bit. Let's see. Oh, actually, before doing that, just make sure you pause your Redshift viewer, because if you start modifying this stuff, you're very likely gonna crash your system. Okay. So just maybe a little bit more, just like bigger sort of ridges rather than sharp ones. It kind of feels like we're looking at like some sort of waveform. Actually, I'm not really digging that. Okay. So I really like how these trails, you know, like are like out of focus, but then they glow really nicely. So I think something like right here. Maybe let's focus on this like third. Let's go ahead and click, and let's click in there. Nice. So you have like nice little detail. And let's see, let's get in here close. There's nice like ridges, but it's maybe like a little too extreme. Actually, let's go ahead and pause this and save, because I'm gonna re-simulate all this. In our emitter, 0.5 is fine, but I think we need to really bring it down. I think 0.1 is probably gonna be better. And let's go ahead and drop in like 300 instead, so it can kind of fill in that space. And let's go ahead and resim it. Oh man, so like see how small it is now compared to what it was? So I think we're going to need to drop in even more. And so just be careful that this can crash your system if you have too many of these. Okay, let's let it play some more. Okay. So with Xparticles, a habit you should definitely form is save, just nonstop. Okay, let's go ahead and restart this guy. It's going to take a little bit longer because now it's generating 600 lines as opposed to the 50 or even 200 from before. And so now we have like this really dense mesh, which we could probably play around with. We can probably do like a little bit more of a wider camera. Instead of a 36, let's do like a 25 or 15. And here we can kind of start getting that nice look. However, our depth of field is really insane right now. So let's go ahead and get something a little bit closer. Yeah, that's way too much. We're going to need to tone this down. So instead of a COC of 1, let's do like a 0.25. Alright, I think that looks a lot nicer. And inside our dome light, right now I kind of just have like what our default. And so, you know, if you don't have this, it's fine. If you have your own sort of like HDRI kits, definitely use them. I just use these because, you know, I bought these, and it makes it a lot easier to iterate. So yeah, we can kind of click through, find something nice. And I don't really like seeing the HDRI in the background. So let's go ahead and click on our dome light, and let's go down just a tiny bit to environment, enable background. Let's just kill that. So now we can just look at the actual lighting. One last thing. I like the lighting on this. I'm just gonna keep this in particular. I don't know if you can tell, but my computer is it's a little chuggy right now. And I think it's because it's just processing all of these different little strands. You know, there's just so many of them. And in fact, I kind of feel like these need to be a lot thinner now. So on our surface, let's go ahead and drop this down to like 0.05. And it's gonna do a thing. It's gonna, just be careful. Just let it do its thing. You know, don't try to force it. And same thing with our glow. 0.05. All right, those ones are a lot faster because there's only so many. All right. And I think another fun thing you can try doing is, so instead of like trying to go over here, just play around with the rotation on the dome light. Let's see what kind of effects you get. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and drop this down from 600 back to 50. And then I'm gonna pause, save, let it do its thing. I'm gonna copy this camera. I just kind of want to keep like a similar field of view. All right, so now let's start it again. Okay, so now we can kind of adjust the lighting here. Let's kind of go back to 0 on these, and let's start adjusting these, see what kind of properties we can get in here. And so you kind of have like that nice little glow down back there. I kind of want the thing to be lit from on top, so I think I might just choose a different HDRI. Something like this maybe. Just needs a little bit more on the top. All right, that didn't do anything. Let's see what else we can do. This one's nice. All right, let's switch over. And let's go ahead and increase our particles again, back to 600. Rewind, pause, save. Rewind, pause, save. That's kind of how you should always work with Xparticles. All right, so let's go ahead and start our preview again. And so now, yeah, you kind of have like the little top view on it. I still think our depth of field is a little bit too extreme, and I think focusing right here would be a lot better, just for from the design standpoint. There we go, something like that. And so yeah, now let's look at the original and look at ours. They're kind of similar, you know. Like obviously there's a lot more detail in this in terms of like there's like little particles, there's more colors and stuff like that. But this is definitely like a good start. And yeah, you can just take this technique and just keep expanding on it and see what you can come up with. But anyways, that's pretty much the end of this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, hopefully you found that tutorial useful. If there's any other techniques that you would like to learn, just go ahead and drop it down in the comment section. As always, you can always reach me at my social medias, which are all over the screen. And if you have any questions or have any requests, just go ahead and drop them there. Until next time, I'll see you around.